The most dangerous thing a mafia boss can lose isn't money, territory, or power. It's the woman who stopped waiting for him. Rain slammed against the windshield of my black Escalade hard enough to blur the Chicago skyline into streaks of silver and smoke. Downtown looked hollow at 2:17 in the morning. Empty streets. Red taillights bleeding across wet pavement. The kind of night that made the whole city feel like it was holding its breath. I loosened my tie with one hand and stared out the passenger window while Marco drove us through the financial district in silence. My phone buzzed again beside me. Another message from one of my captains asking for approval on shipments moving through Navy Pier before sunrise. Another problem demanding my attention. Another fire waiting for me to put it out. I ignored it. For the first time in years, I was tired enough to ignore the empire I'd spent my entire life building. My shoulders ached beneath the weight of my soaked wool coat. My knuckles still stung from slamming my fist into a mahogany conference table 3 hours earlier when I found out someone inside my organization had been leaking information to a rival family. Betrayal always came dressed like loyalty until the mask slipped. That was the first lesson my father ever taught me. "Home, boss?" Marco asked quietly as we stopped at a red light. I looked up at the dark outline of my mansion sitting above Lake Shore Drive in the distance. Usually by this hour, one light would still be on upstairs. Evelyn's reading room. She always waited awake no matter how late I came home. Sometimes with a book in her lap. Sometimes asleep beneath a blanket with the piano music still playing softly through the speakers. I used to think she liked waiting for me. I didn't realize loneliness can become a habit. "Yeah," I muttered. "Home." The gates opened automatically as we pulled into the driveway. Rain hammered against the stone courtyard while fountains overflowed beneath the storm. The mansion stood silent in front of me, glowing faintly beneath the outdoor lanterns like some expensive mausoleum built for people too rich to admit they were miserable. Something felt wrong. Immediately. No lights upstairs. No music. No shadows moving behind the curtains. Just silence. Thick. Cold. Wrong. Marco stepped out first and opened my door, but I barely noticed. My stomach tightened as I climbed the marble steps 2 at a time. I told myself I was exhausted. That was all. The key turned. The front doors opened slowly. Darkness swallowed me whole. "Evelyn." My voice echoed through the massive foyer and disappeared. No answer. Usually she heard me immediately. Usually I'd smell vanilla candles burning somewhere near the kitchen. Usually there'd be half-finished tea waiting on the counter because she always made too much when she was nervous. Tonight there was nothing. I loosened my coat and walked deeper into the house. The grandfather clock near the staircase ticked loudly enough to make my skin crawl. Then I saw it. A single envelope sitting perfectly centered on the dining room table beneath the chandelier. White paper against black marble. My name written across the front in Evelyn's handwriting. Suddenly my chest felt too tight. I walked toward it slowly, every step heavier than the last. Vincent. Just my name. No hearts. No love. No softness left in the ink. Rain thundered against the windows as I opened the envelope. Divorce papers. For a second, I genuinely thought I was hallucinating from exhaustion. My eyes moved across the pages once. Twice. Then I saw her signature at the bottom. Evelyn Carter DeLuca. Final. Official. Real. My pulse started hammering so violently I could hear it in my ears. What the hell? The room tilted slightly beneath me. Then something small slipped from inside the envelope and landed softly against the marble floor. Her wedding ring. I stared at it in silence. Gold. Tiny diamonds. The ring I slid onto her finger 6 years ago while she cried through her vows in a cathedral filled with people afraid of me. My wife had left me. No screaming fight. No warning. No shattered glass. She had simply stopped loving me quietly enough that I never heard it happen. Then I noticed the second piece of paper folded beneath the divorce documents. One sentence written in shaky ink. You missed the only funeral that mattered. And suddenly, I couldn't breathe. I stood alone in the dining room for what could have been 5 minutes or 5 hours. Time stopped feeling real the moment I saw her ring lying on that black marble table like a tiny gold coffin. Rain rolled down the windows in slow silver streaks while the chandelier above me swayed almost invisibly from the storm outside. The house felt colder without her in it. I never realized how much warmth one person could carry until she took all of it with her. My phone buzzed again in my pocket. I ignored it. Another call. Another message. Another man needing orders from me because the city never slept and neither did the empire attached to my name. Usually I answered immediately. Tonight I could barely breathe. I picked up the note again with unsteady fingers. You missed the only funeral that mattered. The sentence carved straight through my chest because deep down, somewhere beneath years of pride and business and control, I already knew what she meant. My eyes drifted toward the hallway leading to the east wing of the mansion before I even realized I was moving. The nursery. We had argued about that room for months. Evelyn wanted sunlight and pale blue walls. I wanted security cameras near every entrance to the property after threats started coming in from rival organizations. She said I treated our future child like another asset to protect instead of someone to love. I remember laughing at the time. God. I actually laughed. The hallway lights flickered softly overhead as I walked toward the room we never got to use. My footsteps echoed against polished hardwood floors that suddenly sounded too loud in the silence. The nursery door was half open. I pushed it gently. The smell hit me first. Lavender. Faint but still there. Evelyn always burned lavender candles whenever she decorated because she said it made rooms feel peaceful. Moonlight spilled through the tall windows onto untouched furniture. The white crib sat in the corner beside a rocking chair she spent weeks choosing online. Tiny stuffed animals lined the shelves beneath framed watercolor paintings she made herself during the second trimester. I swallowed hard. My chest physically hurt now. Like someone had reached inside me and wrapped a fist around my lungs. Then I noticed the hospital bracelet sitting on the dresser. Evelyn Carter DeLuca. Mercy General Hospital. Date stamped 3 weeks earlier. 3 weeks. My mind raced backward instantly. 3 weeks ago I had been in Manhattan handling negotiations with a shipping company tied to one of our ports. 3 weeks ago Evelyn kept texting me asking when I would come home. 3 weeks ago I silenced her calls during a meeting because one of my captains was talking about financial losses and I did not want distractions. My stomach twisted violently. I grabbed my phone and opened my missed calls. 17 voicemails. All from her. All from the same night. My pulse thundered in my ears as I pressed play on the last one. Static crackled softly before her voice filled the dark nursery. Small. Shaking. Barely holding together. Vincent, a pause. Uneven breathing. Please answer your phone. Another pause longer this time. I could hear hospital monitors faintly in the background. I do not want to be here alone. My knees almost gave out beneath me. I gripped the edge of the dresser so hard my fingers cramped. They said something is wrong with the baby, she whispered. I am scared. Silence. Then the voicemail ended. Just like that. No dramatic goodbye. No screaming. No accusation. Just fear. Pure fear. And I had ignored her because I was too busy protecting a business that suddenly felt disgusting compared to the sound of my wife crying alone in a hospital bed. I pressed the phone against my forehead and closed my eyes. The storm outside rumbled low across the lake while the empty rocking chair beside the crib moved slightly in the air conditioning. And for the first time since I was a teenager growing up around men who taught me emotions were weakness, I felt something inside me break completely. People think loneliness is loud. It is not. Real loneliness sounds like a mansion so quiet you can hear the refrigerator humming from 2 rooms away while the woman you love cries somewhere you refuse to go. I stayed in the nursery until sunrise. I do not remember sitting down, but sometime around 4 in the morning I found myself in the rocking chair Evelyn picked out from a boutique store in downtown Chicago after making me visit 6 different places because she wanted the perfect one. At the time, I thought it was ridiculous. A chair was a chair. Now I stared at the tiny moon and stars blanket folded neatly over the armrest like it belonged to a child who had simply stepped out for the day and would come back any minute. The storm outside finally weakened just before dawn. Gray light crept through the windows slowly, washing the nursery in pale shadows. My phone had stopped vibrating sometime during the night. Marco probably realized I was not answering anyone. Good. Let the entire city wait. I pressed play on the voicemail again. And again. And again. Each time her voice sounded weaker. Smaller. Like someone trying not to fall apart completely. I do not want to be here alone. Christ. I dragged both hands down my face and leaned forward, elbows on my knees. My wedding ring felt heavier than usual. I had spent years believing love meant providing things. Security. Houses. Cars. Protection. Expensive vacations Evelyn barely enjoyed because I spent most of them taking calls. I gave her everything except the one thing she actually begged me for. Myself. My eyes drifted toward the watercolor paintings hanging above the crib. Evelyn painted them during late nights while waiting for me to come home. I remembered walking past this room weeks ago and seeing her sitting cross-legged on the floor in one of my oversized sweaters with paint on her fingers. She looked up at me with tired blue eyes and smiled anyway. "Do you think the stars are too much?" she asked softly. I barely glanced at the wall. "Looks good, sweetheart." Then I kissed the top of her head and walked away because somebody downstairs was waiting to discuss business. That memory hit me so hard I physically winced. Looks good. That was all I gave her after she spent hours creating something for our child. God, how many moments had I destroyed without even noticing? Around 7 in the morning I finally forced myself to stand. My legs felt stiff. Heavy. Like my body had aged 10 years overnight. I walked back downstairs through the silent mansion while early sunlight reflected across marble floors that suddenly looked cold and lifeless. Evelyn used to fill this house with music. Old jazz records on Sunday mornings. Soft piano at night. She talked to flowers while arranging them in crystal vases because she claimed they liked encouragement. I used to tease her about that. Now every room felt dead without her voice moving through it. The kitchen stopped me cold. A mug still sat beside the coffee machine. White ceramic with tiny painted lemons on the side. Her favorite. I picked it up slowly. Cold coffee inside. 3 weeks old probably. My stomach twisted again when I noticed the folded paper tucked beneath it. Another note. My pulse jumped instantly as I opened it. "Vincent, if you ever listen to those voicemails, please do not come looking for me unless you are finally ready to understand why I left. Not fix it. Not control it. Understand it." I stared at her handwriting until the words blurred. Then something else caught my eye near the sink. Prescription bottles. Prenatal vitamins. Anxiety medication. Sleeping pills. All untouched for weeks. My chest tightened dangerously. Evelyn had been drowning right in front of me. And I was too busy being feared by the world to notice the woman in my own house was disappearing piece by piece. Then Marco's voice suddenly echoed from the foyer. "Boss?" He sounded hesitant. "Careful. There is someone here asking for you." I stepped into the hallway still holding Evelyn's note. Who? Marco swallowed once before answering quietly. Mercy General Hospital sent over a box of Mrs. DeLuca's personal belongings. And somehow that hurt even worse than the divorce papers. The box from Mercy General sat on my kitchen island like evidence from a crime scene nobody wanted to talk about. Simple brown cardboard. A white hospital label taped across the top with Evelyn's name written in black marker. That was all her pain became in the end. A box. Marco stood near the entrance to the kitchen watching me carefully while two of my security men waited farther back pretending not to look concerned. They had all seen me angry before. The city had seen me furious before. But this was different. Rage burns hot. This felt cold. Hollow. Dangerous in a way I could not explain even to myself. You want me to stay, boss? Marco asked quietly. I shook my head once. Out. Nobody argued. 30 seconds later the mansion fell silent again except for the ticking clock above the stove and the faint hum of rainwater dripping from the gutters outside. I stared at the box for a long time before finally opening it. Inside was Evelyn's life reduced to a few personal belongings gathered by a nurse who probably had no idea she was packing away the remains of someone's broken heart. Her phone charger. A paperback novel with folded corners. A soft gray cardigan that still carried traces of her perfume. Lavender and vanilla. My chest tightened so hard I had to look away for a second. Then I saw the envelope. Smaller than the others. My name written across the front again in that careful handwriting I knew better than my own signature. My fingers trembled slightly as I opened it. Vincent, if you are reading this, then you finally came home long enough to notice I was gone. I closed my eyes instantly. God. Every sentence she wrote felt like a blade sliding between my ribs. I forced myself to keep reading. I used to count the hours until I heard your footsteps at night. I used to sit awake convincing myself that loving someone powerful meant accepting loneliness as part of the deal. But somewhere along the way, I stopped feeling like your wife and started feeling like furniture inside your house. The words blurred for a second before my vision steadied again. Furniture. Christ. I remembered all the nights Evelyn sat quietly beside me during dinner while I answered calls through entire conversations she tried to start. The birthdays I missed. The anniversaries I rescheduled. The mornings I left before sunrise without kissing her goodbye because I was chasing meetings, money, control. I told myself I was doing it for us. But there was never really an us in the life I built. There was me. And there was the woman waiting in the background hoping someday I would finally notice she was lonely. I kept reading. The night we lost the baby, I realized something sitting alone in that hospital bed. If I died too, it would probably take your empire 3 hours before they noticed you stopped answering your phone. But it would take you days to notice I was gone. I physically staggered backward after reading that line. My hand gripped the edge of the counter hard enough to steady myself. Because she was right. She was completely right. 3 weeks. Evelyn had been gone for 3 weeks before I understood my marriage was ending. Tears burned unexpectedly behind my eyes and I hated how unfamiliar the feeling was. I was 34 years old. Men like me did not cry. Men like me buried emotions beneath expensive suits and colder reputations. But standing alone in that massive kitchen holding my wife's letter, I suddenly understood something terrifying. Power means absolutely nothing when the person you love no longer believes you care whether they survive. Something small slipped from the envelope and landed softly beside the box. A sonogram photo. Wrinkled from being folded too many times. I stared at the blurry little image while my breathing slowly unraveled. Our child. My child. The baby I never even made time to hear the heartbeat for. On the back, in Evelyn's handwriting, were 6 words that shattered whatever remained inside me. He would have had your eyes. I did not move for a long time after reading the sonogram photo. My hand was still resting on the edge of the kitchen counter, but I was no longer aware of the pressure in my fingers or the cold marble beneath them. Everything inside my head had gone quiet in the same way a battlefield goes silent right after something catastrophic happens. No noise. No movement. Just the echo of what was already lost. Evelyn's words repeated in my mind again and again like a voice I could not turn off. He would have had your eyes. I finally exhaled, but it felt wrong, like my body had forgotten how breathing was supposed to work. I picked up the phone from the counter without thinking and dialed Marco. He answered on the first ring. "Boss." His voice was careful, like he already knew something had changed. "Find her," I said. My voice came out lower than I expected. Controlled, but hollow. "I do not care how many people you need. I do not care how far she went. I want Evelyn located today." There was a pause on the other end. Marco did not ask questions, which meant he understood the tone in my voice better than most people ever had. "Yes, boss," he said quietly. I ended the call and immediately opened another one, this time to my financial advisor. "Freeze all personal transfers above $10,000, I said. "And pull every private account tied to Evelyn Carter DeLuca." Another pause. "Sir, that will trigger audits in 3 separate institutions." "Do it anyway," I replied. I hung up before he could respond. The mansion felt different now. Not emptier. Heavier. Like the air itself had changed after the truth had finally been spoken out loud. I walked back through the hallway slowly, past the nursery again, but I could not bring myself to enter. The door remained slightly open, and from where I stood I could still see the untouched crib inside. A life that never got the chance to begin. I kept walking until I reached my office at the far end of the house. The room where I used to make decisions that affected entire organizations now felt smaller than it ever had before. I turned on the desk lamp and sat down. For the first time in years, I did not open a laptop or check encrypted messages. Instead, I pulled out a single sheet of paper and began writing names. Doctors. Hospitals. Security logs. Every contact I could remember from the night everything changed. My handwriting became sharper with each line. Not from anger. From focus. Because something inside me had shifted permanently. This was no longer about control. It was about understanding what I had ignored. Hours passed without me noticing. At some point, Marco returned and knocked once before entering. He placed a tablet on my desk. "We found her last known bank activity," he said carefully. "Small withdrawals. Cash only. 2 weeks ago in Oregon." I looked up immediately. "Oregon?" Marco nodded. "Small town on the coast. No corporate ties. No known associates. She is staying off-grid." I stared at the location on the screen. A place so far removed from everything I had built that it almost felt unreal. Evelyn had not just left me. She had erased herself from my world entirely. "Send someone," I said instantly. Marco hesitated. "Do you want observation or retrieval?" I stood up slowly and walked to the window overlooking the city. Light stretched across the horizon like an empire that suddenly felt meaningless. For a long moment, I said nothing. Then I spoke quietly. "No one touches her. No one approaches her. You understand me?" Marco nodded once. "Yes, boss." I watched the city below and realized something I had never understood before. I had spent my entire life building a world where nothing could be taken from me. But I had never learned what to do when the only thing that mattered no longer wanted to be found. And for the first time, the fear I felt was not about losing power. It was about losing her completely. I did not sleep that night. Or the night after that. Time stopped behaving normally inside the mansion, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath with me. Every hour, I checked my phone even though I already knew Marco would update me the moment anything changed. Evelyn was still gone. No confirmed location. No new financial activity. Just a faint trail leading to a place in Oregon that kept repeating in my head like a warning I could not ignore. By the third morning, I stopped pretending I was running a business. I sat in my office with the blinds half closed, staring at a map on my desk that Marco had printed out. A small coastal town. The kind of place people go when they want the world to forget they exist. I should have been relieved she was safe enough to disappear. Instead, I felt something worse. Distance. The kind that cannot be measured in miles. My phone vibrated again. This time it was Marco calling. I answered immediately. "Talk to me." "We confirmed a residence," he said. "A small rental house near the shoreline. No security system. Minimal visibility. She has been there approximately 11 days. I closed my eyes briefly. 11 days. She had been breathing in a completely different world while I was drowning in regret. In a mansion full of silence. Is she alone? I asked. There was a pause before he answered. Yes. That single word hit harder than anything else I had heard since this began. I ended the call and stood up immediately. My decision was already made before I even reached the door. Within an hour, a black helicopter was waiting on the private landing pad behind the estate. The pilot did not ask questions. He never did. Marco stood beside me as I stepped inside. "Boss," he said carefully, "if she does not want to see you." I cut him off without looking at him. "She already left once," I said. "I am not losing her again without hearing the truth from her mouth." The helicopter lifted into the gray sky as the city shrank beneath us. Skyscrapers turned into lines. Roads into threads. Everything I had built suddenly looked small from above. Hours passed in silence broken only by radio static and the steady rhythm of blades cutting through air. I did not speak. I did not move. I just stared out at the horizon, replaying every moment I had failed her. Not the big failures. The small ones. The ignored calls. The unanswered questions. The nights I chose power over presence. When we finally landed, the air was different. Cold. Salt heavy. The ocean stretched out endlessly beyond the landing zone, gray and restless beneath a sky that looked like it had forgotten how to be blue. Marco handed me a simple set of keys and an address scribbled on paper. 2 miles north, he said. We will stay back unless you call. I nodded once and took the car alone. The drive was quiet except for the sound of tires on gravel roads that seemed too narrow for anything important. Trees lined the path like silent witnesses. Every turn brought me closer to something I was not sure I deserved to face. Eventually, I saw it. A small house sitting near the edge of a cliff overlooking the ocean. Simple. White paint slightly worn by salt air. A porch with 2 chairs. One of them empty. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. For a moment, I just sat there. The engine running. My reflection staring back at me through the glass like a stranger I had not fully met yet. Then I got out. The wind. Hit immediately. Strong. Honest. No luxury here. No empire. Just the sound of waves crashing against rocks far below. I walked up the narrow path to the porch and stopped at the top step. Through the window, I saw her. Evelyn. She was sitting at a small wooden table with a sketchbook open in front of her. Her hair was pulled back loosely. No jewelry. No trace of the life she once had with me. She looked lighter. Like something heavy had finally been removed from her shoulders. For a long moment, I could not move. I had spent years believing I understood control. But standing there, I realized I had never controlled anything that mattered. Not the city. Not my enemies. And certainly not the woman sitting quietly inside that house breathing a life I was no longer part of. I raised my hand to knock. And stopped just before my knuckles touched the wood. Because for the first time in my life, I did not know if being seen by me was something she still feared, or something she had already survived. I stood on that porch for what felt like a lifetime, my hand still frozen inches from the wooden door, listening to the ocean below like it was the only thing in the world still allowed to move freely. Inside, Evelyn sat at a small table with a sketchbook open, her pencil moving slowly across the page. She had not noticed me yet, or maybe she had and simply chosen not to react. That possibility hurt more than anything I had faced in years. The wind pressed against my back, cold and steady, as if trying to push me away before I made another mistake. My reflection in the window glass looked unfamiliar. No suit. No city skyline behind me. No empire. Just a man standing too close to the one place he had no right to enter. I finally knocked once. Soft. Controlled. Almost hesitant. The sound traveled through the door and into the room. Evelyn stopped drawing. Not suddenly. Not dramatically. Just paused, as if she had been expecting this moment long before it arrived. Then she set her pencil down. I heard the chair shift. Footsteps approached slowly from inside. Each one felt heavier than the last. The door opened. She stood there in front of me in natural light for the first time in what felt like a different lifetime. No makeup. No curated version of herself for dinners or guests or my world. Just Evelyn. Real. Present. Alive. Her eyes met mine without fear, but also without the softness I remembered. That realization alone nearly made me step back. "Vincent," she said quietly. Not a question. Not an invitation. Just recognition. I swallowed hard, suddenly aware that I had rehearsed nothing for this moment. Every negotiation I had ever made. Every deal. Every confrontation. None of them prepared me for standing in front of the woman I failed and having nothing powerful enough left to say. I started, then stopped because the words felt meaningless. She waited, arms resting lightly at her sides, posture calm in a way that told me she had already survived whatever version of this I had become. The silence stretched between us, filled only by distant waves breaking against the cliff below. Finally, she spoke again. "Why now?" The question was simple. No accusation. No anger. That made it worse. I looked at her and for the first time in my life I could not find control in anything I said or did. "Because I finally understood what I lost," I said. My voice was lower than usual, stripped of authority. "And because I realized I never gave you a reason to stay." Her gaze did not waver. Behind her, I could see the sketchbook still open on the table. Drawings of the ocean. Of the house. Of a life that no longer included me. "You did not lose me in one night," she said softly. "You lost me in 1,000 small moments where I was alone even when you were in the same room." Each word landed without anger, only truth. I nodded once, because there was nothing I could deny. "I know." Another wave crashed below, louder this time. The wind moved through her hair, and for a moment I remembered all the times she waited for me in silence back in the mansion, believing I would eventually notice her presence the way I was noticing her absence now. I stepped slightly closer, stopping before crossing her space. "I am not here to take anything from you," I said. "I am here because I needed to see if you were still real outside of the life I destroyed." A faint shift passed through her expression, something between sadness and understanding. She looked at me for a long moment, studying me the way I used to study rooms before entering them, assessing risk, intent, truth. Then she spoke quietly. "I am real," she said. "But I am not yours anymore." The words did not feel like rejection. They felt like closure. My chest tightened, not from anger, but from the sudden weight of understanding that some things cannot be rebuilt through force, time, or regret. Only through acceptance. I lowered my hand slowly, letting it fall to my side. For the first time since arriving, I stepped back from the door instead of forward. Evelyn did not move to stop me. She did not invite me in. She simply stood there, steady as the shoreline behind her, while I finally understood that love was never something I lost in a single moment. It was something I had let go of slowly, without ever realizing I was doing it. I did not realize I was holding my breath until the moment Evelyn closed the door between us. The soft click of the lock sounded final in a way I was not prepared for. I stood there on the porch, the ocean wind cutting through my coat, while the life I thought I could reclaim stayed safely on the other side of a wooden barrier I no longer had permission to cross. Through the window, I could still see her silhouette moving slowly back toward the table. She did not rush. She did not look back. That silence told me everything I needed to know. I had not scared her. I had simply become irrelevant. My hands curled slowly into fists at my sides, not from anger, but from the strange pressure building inside my chest that I could not name anymore. Behind me, the world I came from felt distant. The empire. The city. The constant weight of responsibility I once thought defined me. None of it mattered here. Only her absence mattered. I finally stepped off the porch and walked down the gravel path toward the car waiting near the road. Marco was standing outside it, watching me carefully without speaking. He did not need to ask what happened. He could see it on my face. "She is not coming back," I said quietly, more to myself than to him. Marco lowered his eyes for a moment, then nodded once. "What do you want us to do, boss?" I looked back at the small house one last time. The curtains moved slightly from the ocean breeze, but she was no longer visible. I thought about every decision that brought me here. Every night I chose silence over conversation. Every morning I left before she woke up. Every time she needed me and I told myself it could wait. "Nothing," I said finally. The word felt foreign. I had never chosen nothing before. Not in business. Not in life. Not in anything. Marco hesitated. "Nothing." I opened the car door and sat inside without answering immediately. The seat felt colder than I remembered. The city was hours away, but it no longer felt like home. "We are not going to force her," I said after a long pause. "We are not going to follow her. We are not going to disrupt her life again." My voice tightened slightly. "She already survived me once. I am not going to make her survive me twice." Marco did not respond right away. The silence inside the car stretched until it became uncomfortable. Finally he nodded. "Understood." I stared out the window as the car started moving. The coastline slowly faded behind us, replaced by open road and gray sky. I expected relief. Instead, I felt something heavier. Not loss exactly. Something closer to clarity. For the first time, I understood that Evelyn leaving was not an event. It was a consequence. A long chain of moments I had chosen without realizing I was choosing them. My phone lit up with messages as we drove. Names of men asking for orders. Problems waiting to be solved. Decisions only I could make. I turned the phone face down without reading any of them. Marco glanced at me briefly through the rearview mirror. "Back to Chicago?" he asked. I looked at the dark screen of my phone reflecting my own face. The man looking back at me no longer felt like someone I recognized. "Yes," I said quietly. Then after a pause I added, "But things will change." Marco did not ask what I meant. He simply nodded again and focused on the road. As the miles passed, I realized something I had never allowed myself to admit before. Power had never been the thing I truly controlled. It had always been her presence that anchored me. And now that she was gone, I was finally forced to confront the one thing I had spent my entire life avoiding. Myself. I returned to Chicago just before midnight. The city looked the same from above, lights scattered across the skyline like nothing had changed while everything inside me had. The helicopter landed quietly on the private pad behind the estate, blades slowing until only silence remained. Marco was already waiting. He opened the door for me, but I did not step out immediately. For a moment, I just sat there, staring at the mansion in the distance. It no longer felt like a place I lived in. It felt like a place I used to disappear inside. Anything new? I asked. Marco shook his head. No contact. No sightings. She is still in the same region. I nodded once and finally stepped out. The air in Chicago felt heavier than it had on the coast, like the city itself was pressing down on me again the moment I returned. Inside the mansion, nothing had changed. That was the problem. Everything was exactly as I left it, as if time here did not know how to move without permission. I walked straight to my office. The lights came on automatically, revealing the same desk, the same files, the same phone that had not stopped vibrating even while I was gone. I ignored it. Instead, I opened the drawer where I had placed Evelyn's last letter. It was still there. Unchanged. Waiting. I read the same lines again, but this time they did not feel like blades. They felt like truth I had finally stopped running from. You do not lose someone in a single moment. You lose them in all the moments you thought you had more time. A knock came at the door. Marco entered without waiting for permission. "Boss," he said carefully, "there is something you need to see." He placed a folder on my desk. I opened it slowly. Inside were updated reports from Oregon. Surveillance summaries. Local witness confirmations. And one photograph. Evelyn standing outside a small community center holding a stack of sketchbooks, surrounded by children laughing. She looked different again. Not just calmer. Free. I stared at the image for a long time without speaking. Marco cleared his throat softly. She has been helping run an art program for kids in the area. No signs of distress. No attempts to leave. I closed the folder. She is building a life, I said quietly. It was not a question. Marco nodded. Yes. I leaned back in my chair and looked at the ceiling for a moment. I had spent my entire life believing control meant keeping things close. Keeping them protected. Keeping them mine. But Evelyn had proven something I had never understood. Control without care is just possession. And possession is not love. It never was. I stood up and walked toward the window overlooking the city. The skyline stretched endlessly, but for the first time it felt empty instead of powerful. Cancel all non-essential operations tomorrow, I said. Marco looked up immediately. All of them? All of them, I repeated. My voice was steady. I need time. He hesitated but nodded. Understood. When he left, the room fell silent again. I remained standing at the window, watching the city move without me needing to command it. For years, I believed the world depended on my decisions. Now I realized something simpler and far more uncomfortable. The world had never needed me as much as I thought it did. It had only feared me. My phone buzzed one last time on the desk. A message from an unknown number. No name. Just a single line. She is finally breathing freely. I stared at it for a long time. Then I turned off the phone completely. Not out of anger. Not out of denial. But because for the first time in my life, I understood that some endings are not meant to be reversed. Only respected.